The multiple choice section of the ELA Common Core is very important. It's probably weighted the most heavily of any of the 3 sections of the exam. It consists of reading passages and 24 multiple choice questions. There are normally 3 passages, a fiction passage, nonfiction, and a poem. You'll be asked many different types of questions. Comprehension questions: what does a word or phrase mean? Sometimes you'll have to inference, like it won't come right out and say something in the text, but you have to infer what a character would do or think, or infer what the tone is based on words in the piece, or the effect of figurative language or a particular detail you'll have to make an inference about. Sometimes you get asked questions about shifts or changes that occur. And many of the questions are about purpose. So you'll often be asked, why is that word or phrase in there? What does it do? What is the purpose of it? What's the author trying to say? What is the purpose of this particular image or literary device? And what is the purpose of the whole piece? What's the central idea or theme? The best way to do well at the multiple choice is, honestly, to practice. When you practice reading these passages and answering the types of questions you'll be asked, you will improve. And so there's nothing better than just practicing as many as you can. But I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to use along the way. So the first 2 are before you even start reading. You want to get the context of the passage. So to do that, sometimes there's introductory information written at the beginning of the passage, and then there's always the author's name and the source and the year it was written at the end of the passage. So you want to make sure and look at those. So here is an example you can see from the exam at the very beginning here. It tells you that this is a speech by the chief of the Seneca Nation. So Native American chief is giving this speech to the United States Secretary of War in 1801. So that is going to set you in the context of the passage, give you some useful information. And then you can just see Red Jacket, that's Chief Red Jacket, is the person who gave the speech. And this was the book that it was in that was published in 1902. The next thing I would do is look at the questions that you're being asked, and it often tells you what line numbers it's asking a question about. So before I even read, I would go to the passage. This says line 13 through 15. So I would go to the passage and I would highlight those lines, and I normally highlight a couple lines above 13 and a couple lines below 13. And then as I'm reading through the whole passage, I know I want to pay particular attention to this part because I'm going to be asked a question about the purpose of these lines probably. So here's what my paper looks like with the highlights after I've looked at each question to see which chunk I need to highlight. And I know they're going to ask me some sort of probably purpose question about each of those chunks that I can pay attention to while I read. The last 2 tips are to highlight and annotate the passage as you go. Now, students don't want to do this. I walk around sometimes and I see blank passages just reading through the whole thing without annotating or highlighting anything. That is a mistake because you will understand it better if you stop every once in a while, like after a section, and jot down what's the purpose of that section. What's the author trying to tell the reader in that section? And then if you highlight words that stand out and create tone, that will help you as you move along. So I'll show you how to do that in a second. And the last one is make sure that you use the vocabulary key. So if I see here there's a number 1 next to this word, that tells me at the bottom of the page, it's going to give me longtang. It's going to tell me what that word means. So that is the name, that's what they call vast neighborhoods inside enclosed alleys. So it's important that I know longtang means a neighborhood. Okay, so now I'm going to read through the first section, the first paragraph with you, and I'm going to show you what I would highlight and what I would annotate and what I would ask myself. And then I'm going to have you go through and do the rest. And this is from the August 2014 ELA Common Core exam. Reading Comprehension Passage A. Against the clamor of the city, who could hear the prayers being uttered in Peace Lane? So automatically I would highlight prayers. And I would highlight clamor of the city. Who would notice people whose dearest wish in life is not to be praised for merit, but only to avoid making mistakes? So I'm going to highlight avoid making mistakes there. Here, a lean-to shed has been added on to the terrace and the courtyard roofed over to make a kitchen. If you were to look down upon the rooftops of the city, you would find them in utter disarray, worn and dilapidated. Structures built on top of structures, taking up every bit of free space. So the words utter disarray, worn and dilapidated or run down, those are standing out to me. This was especially true of the older longtang. And remember, we went down, we saw the number 1, so we went down and looked at the definition at the bottom of the page, which tells us that means neighborhood. So worn, dilapidated, that is especially true of the older neighborhoods, like Peace Lane. It's a miracle that they haven't collapsed yet. About a third of the tiles were broken, patched over in places with bits of felt. The wooden frames on the doors and windows were blackened and rotting, with everything in view a uniform ash gray. So here I would highlight broken, patched, blackened, and rotting, uniform ash gray. So now that I've finished that section, that paragraph, before I just keep moving on, I would write something over on the side. I would write an annotation. And I'm noticing that all of these words are creating like a dark, gloomy tone, right? This place is run down. It's in disarray. It's broken. It's blackened and rotting. So I can see that the author's purpose, I ask myself, what is the author's purpose here? Why is the author including this? So it seems like the author's trying to tell me that this place was worn down and out of shape and creating this dark, gloomy tone. So I would write that in an annotation on the side of the first paragraph. I would write down what I think the author is doing, the tone, what's the purpose. And then I would move on and read the next part and underline or highlight whatever stands out to me there and do the same thing, write an annotation. So I'm going to stop now and let you continue with the reading of the rest of this passage and then go ahead and answer the multiple choice questions. Make sure you annotate and underline or highlight as you go.